Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell y'all something. When you come at a nation like India, you better come correct. See, India is not just another country on the map. India is history, culture, pride, and one of the toughest players in the global arena. Now, somebody thought he could talk down to India, throw shade, try to flex with words like he was the only one sitting at the grown-up table. But what happened? India stood up, straightened its shoulders, and said, "Hold up, you must not know who you're talking to." That's called hitting back. Because here's the thing, you can underestimate somebody once, maybe twice, but when you push them enough, they'll remind you exactly why they belong. India is not that quiet kid in the back of the classroom anymore. India is that student who studied, put in the work, rose to the top of the class, and now you're looking around shocked, wondering how they got there. So when Trump came swinging with his words, India didn't fold, India didn't beg, India didn't cower. India hit back with dignity, with power, and with a smile that said, "We've been here before and we'll be here after you're gone. Now, let's talk about what hitting back really means. It doesn't always mean screaming louder. It doesn't always mean stomping your feet. Sometimes it's about strategy. Sometimes it's about showing the world you've got your own lane, your own speed, and your own power." And India did just that. They reminded the globe that when you have one of the largest populations, a growing economy, and influence that stretches from Silicon Valley to the space race, you don't need anybody's permission to stand tall. See, Trump thought it was going to be a one-way conversation. He thought he was holding the mic. But India grabbed that mic right back. And not with petness, not with weakness, but with confidence. India said, "We'll buy your products, we build your tech, we send our brightest minds to your universities, we sit across from you at negotiations. Don't forget, we're not small, we're not soft, we're not scared." That's what a clapback looks like when a country knows its worth. And the beauty of it is this, when you hit back with truth, you don't have to exaggerate. India didn't have to scream, didn't have to make up numbers, didn't have to puff up. All they had to do was stand on what's real. They pointed to their advancements in technology, their growing economy, their global partnerships, their role in medicine, their role in science, their role in shaping the future. And that truth stung harder than any insult could. Because here's a life lesson. People can say whatever they want about you, but if you know your value, if you know your place, if you know your contribution, you can't be shaken. And that's the message India delivered. They said, "We don't need to be validated by you. We know who we are." And that's the kind of self-assurance that makes the whole world sit up and listen. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about politics. This was about pride. It was about a billion voices being respected. It was about a nation saying, "Don't mistake humility for weakness," because India is patient, India is respectful, India is diplomatic, but don't confuse that for silence. When it's time to speak, India speaks loud enough for the whole world to hear. Now, let me bring this home. The whole world saw that moment and understood respect is not optional. You can't come talking reckless and expect everybody to bow down. Not when they've got the receipts to prove their worth. And India had them. They stood tall, they clapped back, and they reminded the world and Trump that strength isn't just about volume, it's about presence, it's about contribution, it's about respect. When you think about dignity, you think about a person or a nation that knows exactly who they are, what they stand for, and where they belong. India, for decades, has carried that weight with quiet pride. But there comes a moment in history when silence doesn't serve anymore, when humility can be mistaken for weakness, and when someone comes forward thinking they can talk down to you, you have to stand up and let the world know that you are not here to be disrespected. India refuses to be talked down to, and that refusal is not arrogance, it's dignity, it's self-respect, and it's a reminder to the world that India is not just a nation to be spoken about, but a force to be spoken with. When someone like Trump throws words across the ocean, thinking they can minimize India, it's a direct challenge not just to policies, but to the pride of over 1 billion people. And when you have 1 billion people behind you, you don't bow, you don't shrink, you don't nod politely, you rise. Now, people often confuse hitting back with anger. They think it means yelling louder, swinging harder, trying to break the other side down. But when India hits back, it's not about lowering itself to pettiness. It's about lifting itself to its true height and letting the world look up and see. India has endured centuries of being underestimated, from colonization to global stereotypes, from being dismissed as developing to being treated like an afterthought in global politics. But those days are gone. India today is the world's largest democracy, a rising economic powerhouse, and a hub of innovation. You cannot ignore a country that sends satellites into space on a budget smaller than some Hollywood movies, that provides medicine to half the globe, that builds tech giants shaping the very phones and software people are using to communicate. So when Trump spoke down, India's refusal was not just a clapback, it was a statement of fact. It was a reminder this is not the India you thought you could lecture. This is not the India you assumed would stay in the shadows. This is a new India, confident, prepared, and unafraid to claim its place. And you know why this moment matters? Because it wasn't just about two leaders exchanging words. It was about a shift in global power dynamics. For decades, the conversation has always been one-sided, where the West lectures and the rest of the world listens. But India showed that era is closing. India made it clear dialogue has to be mutual, respect has to be equal, and if you come at us with arrogance, we'll respond with reality. It was a powerful moment for every Indian watching because it gave a voice to the frustration so many have felt for years. This idea that India always has to play the polite role, the accommodating role, the secondary role. But when India refused to be talked down to, it gave its people a sense of pride, a sense of validation, a sense of empowerment that said, yes, this is who we are. We don't need approval, we demand respect. Let's be honest, Trump's style has always been brash. He's used to being the loudest person in the room, used to steamrolling opponents, used to turning every conversation into a one-man show. But India is not an opponent you can steamroll. India is not a crowd you can intimidate with theatrics. India is a nation that has faced down colonizers, invaders, economic struggles, political turbulence, and still risen to stand taller every decade. So when Trump tried to position himself as the superior voice, India's response was a cultural clapback. It wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, but it was sharp, it was strategic, and it was undeniable. And that's the essence of dignity. You don't need to break someone down to prove your worth. You just need to remind them of what you already bring to the table. Think about it like this. Imagine you're at a dinner party and someone thinks they're the host when they're really just another guest. They talk over everyone, make jokes at other people's expense, act like the evening revolves around them. But then another guest calmly points out, actually, without me, this dinner wouldn't even have the food on the table. That's what India did. It didn't storm out. It didn't throw plates. It simply reminded the world that without its contributions, its trade, its knowledge, its culture, its innovation, the global table doesn't look the same. And once you make that clear, you shift the entire energy of the room. This moment wasn't just about international politics. It was about setting an example for every individual who's ever been underestimated. Because all of us, at some point, know what it feels like to be talked down to. Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's in a relationship. Maybe it's in society. People think they can minimize you, talk over you, make you feel small. And the temptation is to either lash out or stay quiet. But India showed a third way: stand firm in your dignity. Don't let someone else's words define your worth. Let your track record, your contributions, your identity, and your confidence do the talking. That's not just a political lesson. That's a life lesson. Because when you know your value, nobody can reduce you with insults. And let's not forget, India's strength doesn't come only from its economy or its technology. It comes from its people. Over 1 billion voices, diverse, resilient, innovative, hardworking, all of them fueling this rise. When Trump came with his words, he wasn't just facing a leader, he was facing the pride of an entire nation. And that pride is not something you can dismiss. That pride has carried India through centuries of adversity. That pride is what makes India a country that not only survives but thrives, that not only listens but speaks, that not only takes a seat at the table, but often helps build the table itself. Would you like me to keep the same storytelling rhythm and all the other keynote expansions too, so they flow like parts of one big keynote speech? When people hear the phrase hitting back, they often think it's about aggression, about raising your voice, about getting louder than the person across from you. They think it's about shouting so forcefully that the other side has no choice but to sit down. But true strength isn't always in the noise. True power isn't always in the volume. Sometimes it's in the pause. Sometimes it's in the measured response. Sometimes it's in the ability to look someone in the eye and let your actions speak louder than anything you could ever say. That's what hitting back with strength and strategy looks like. It's not chaos. It's not reactionary anger. It's calculated. It's deliberate. And it lands harder than any tantrum ever could. When India faced harsh words from Trump, the easy move would have been to mirror his energy, to shout back, to throw out insults. But India chose a higher road, one paved with strategy, history, and undeniable truth. That's how you hit back without losing your balance. Think about a fighter in the ring. The amateur comes out swinging wildly, trying to prove he's tough by throwing everything he's got in the first round. But the professional knows better. He studies his opponent. He moves with patience. He chooses his punches carefully because he knows that the right punch at the right time can do more damage than 100 wild swings. India is that professional. When Trump swung with words, India didn't get rattled, didn't throw haymakers just to look strong. It waited, it positioned itself, it chose its responses strategically, and when it hit back, the whole world felt it. That's why strategy matters more than volume, and the beauty of strategy is that it has layers. On the surface, you may think India's response was polite, diplomatic, measured, but underneath, it was layered with intention. Every word chosen, every policy emphasized, every global alliance reinforced was a reminder that India doesn't need to fight to prove it belongs. It already belongs. And this is the essence of hitting back with strength. It's not about lowering yourself to someone else's level. It's about making them rise to yours. It's about shifting the conversation so that they can't drag you down into the mud. Because the one who screams may feel powerful in the moment, but the one who calmly presents undeniable truth, that's the one people remember. Now, strength also means knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Not every insult deserves a reply. Not every jab requires a reaction. Sometimes silence itself is the hit back because it shows you're not even bothered. But when you do choose to respond, it must be with clarity and conviction. India understood this. By standing on its record, its economic growth, its influence in technology, its contributions to global health, its role in world affairs, it didn't need to insult, it didn't need to exaggerate. All it had to do was say, look at what we've done, look at what we're doing, look at where we're headed. And that truth landed harder than any verbal blow. Because here's the thing, facts don't flinch. Progress doesn't bend, achievement doesn't stutter. That's the power of strength combined with strategy. It's easy to react emotionally, to lash out when someone disrespects you. But reacting emotionally often plays right into the other person's hands. That's what they want. They want you to lose control. They want you to look foolish. They want to drag you into a fight on their terms. But when you stay calm, when you stand tall, when you choose your responses with purpose, you flip the script. You turn their attempt to belittle you into an opportunity to elevate yourself. That's what India did. Instead of being drawn into a shouting match, it displayed composure. Instead of trying to prove its power with anger, it proved its power with presence. Instead of being reactive, it was proactive. And that is what true hitting back looks like. It's not fire against fire. It's light against darkness. Look at history, and you'll see that the greatest leaders, the greatest nations, the greatest movements didn't win by being the loudest. They won by being the most strategic. They won by being steady when everyone else was unstable. They won by refusing to let emotion cloud their judgment. That's the lesson in India's approach. Strength is not always loud. Strategy is not always obvious, but together they are unstoppable. India didn't need to tear anyone else down. It just needed to shine its own light brighter. And when you shine your light, you naturally expose the shadows of those trying to undermine you. And here's the personal side of that lesson in our own lives. We all face people who try to talk down to us, people who want to provoke us, people who thrive on our reactions. The temptation is to meet them at their level, to match their energy, to fight fire with fire. But that rarely ends well. The wiser path is to step back, breathe, and ask yourself what's the most strategic way to respond. How can I protect my dignity, prove my worth, and still come out stronger? That's where the real win lies. Because when you react recklessly, you may feel good for a moment, but when you respond strategically, you stay in control, and control is where true strength lies. India knew this by keeping its responses grounded in fact, by staying poised, by reminding the world of its place through its actions rather than its volume. It demonstrated a level of maturity that outshined the noise. And in that moment, the world saw the difference between temporary bravado and lasting strength. One fades quickly, the other stands the test of time. When a country wants to prove its worth, it doesn't need to scream it from the rooftops. It doesn't need to shout louder than everybody else in the room. All it really has to do is point to what it has built, what it has achieved, and what it continues to contribute. That's what India did when it showcased its economic, technological, and cultural power as proof of its influence. See, there's a big difference between talking big and having big results to show. A lot of leaders and nations rely on rhetoric, making promises, exaggerating their importance, puffing themselves up with words. But India pulled out receipts, and those receipts came in the form of rapid economic growth, innovation that stretches from space exploration to digital infrastructure, cultural contributions that resonate across continents, and the undeniable reality that no global conversation can be complete without India at the table. Let's start with the economy. For decades, India was treated as an emerging player, a country with potential but not yet commanding attention. But today, the numbers speak for themselves. India is among the fastest growing major economies in the world. Multinational corporations set up shop there, global investors pour money into its markets, and millions of people are being lifted into a new middle class. And it's not just about statistics on paper. It's about the fact that India has become a marketplace too big to ignore. You can't dismiss a country where over 1 billion people drive demand for products, services, and technology. You can't brush aside a nation that fuels the supply chains of the world. That economic muscle alone was enough to make the world pay attention. And when Trump tried to minimize India, the truth of those numbers hit back harder than any insult could. Now, beyond the economy, let's talk about technology. India has positioned itself not just as a consumer of technology, but as a producer, an innovator, and a leader in the digital age. From being the back office of the world to becoming the brain trust behind some of the most cutting-edge innovations, India's transformation is undeniable. Indian engineers and scientists are shaping Silicon Valley, building software, designing apps, creating platforms that billions of people across the globe rely on every single day. And that's not even mentioning the fact that India is making giant strides in its own technological ecosystem. Affordable smartphones, digital payment systems, and government-backed innovations like Aadhaar have revolutionized daily life for hundreds of millions of people. And when India launched missions to the moon and Mars on budgets that made the rest of the world shake their heads in disbelief, it wasn't just about exploration. It was about making a statement we can do more with less. We can innovate at a scale and speed that forces the entire globe to pay attention. That's not just hitting back with words, that's hitting back with proof. But what truly sets India apart is that it's not just about numbers or machines, it's about culture. Cultural influence is power because culture shapes hearts, minds, and imaginations. India's culture stretches far beyond its borders through music, cinema, food, fashion, philosophy, and spirituality. Bollywood films are watched across continents. Indian music blends into global playlists. Yoga and meditation, rooted in Indian tradition, have become billion-dollar industries in the West. Indian cuisine is on menus in every major city in the world. That kind of influence doesn't come from force. It comes from resonance. It comes from offering something so rich, so diverse, and so compelling that people everywhere want to be part of it. And that's a kind of soft power you cannot erase with harsh words. So when Trump threw his criticism, India's response wasn't to go on the defensive. It was to remind the world of this trifecta: economic strength, technological leadership, and cultural influence. Put those together, and what you see is a nation that doesn't need to demand respect. It commands it naturally. Because when you're holding that kind of weight, the rest of the world has no choice but to recognize you. That's the ultimate clapback. Not an insult, not a punchline, but an undeniable demonstration of relevance. And let's think about why this matters. Power in the modern world is not measured by who can shout the loudest. It's measured by who can impact lives, who can shape economies, who can lead innovation, who can influence culture. India checked every single one of those boxes. When you think about global health, India produces medicine that keeps millions alive. When you think about technology, India provides the brains behind the code running your phone and your laptop. When you think about culture, India creates the rhythms, flavors, and ideas that people adopt in their daily lives without even realizing it. That's not a small thing. That's not something you can ignore or belittle. And so when Trump tried to put India in a corner, India didn't even have to fight back with fire. It just had to shine a light on what it already is. And that's the essence of this keynote. Influence doesn't come from insecurity. It doesn't come from defensiveness. It doesn't come from throwing fits. Influence comes from proof, and India's proof is everywhere. It's in the skyscrapers of Bangalore, the laboratories of Hyderabad, the studios of Mumbai, the classrooms where millions of young students prepare to shape the future. It's in the diaspora communities across the globe who rise to positions of leadership, innovation, and creativity, carrying their heritage proudly while contributing to their adopted countries. That's how India hits back with results, with achievements, with a presence so large that no words can diminish it. Would you like me to keep this same pattern of flow? Economy, technology, culture, then personal life lesson. For the other keynote expansions too, so the whole speech feels unified. Respect is one of those things that can never be bought, never be borrowed, never be demanded. It's earned, plain and simple, and the way you earn it is through what you bring to the table. That's true for individuals, and it's just as true for nations. You don't get to bully your way into respect. You don't get to intimidate people into admiring you. You don't get to stand on a stage and shout louder than everybody else and think that somehow makes you important. Respect doesn't work like that. Respect is built on contribution, on proof, on impact. When India faced Trump's attempt to diminish its presence, it didn't waste time trading insults. It didn't scramble to prove itself through empty words. It simply reminded the world that respect is not something you can take by force. It's something you earn by showing up, by contributing, by proving your value again and again in ways that cannot be denied. And the way India has earned respect is through its contributions across the board. Look at healthcare. India is known as the pharmacy of the world. Affordable medicine, life-saving drugs, vaccines. So much of that is manufactured in India and distributed across continents. During global crisis, when many nations turned inward and hoarded resources, India stepped up to supply others, proving that respect is earned not just by what you achieve for yourself, but by what you're willing to share with the world. That kind of contribution builds credibility because people remember who shows up for them when it matters most. No insult, no dismissive comment, no harsh word can erase that kind of legacy. Now look at technology. India doesn't just provide skilled workers. It produces innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders who drive the global economy forward. From CEOs of major tech companies to startups changing the way we live and work. India's fingerprints are everywhere in the digital landscape. That's not a fluke. That's the result of decades of investment in education, ambition, and resilience. When Trump tried to posture, India didn't have to shout back. All it had to do was point to the fact that some of the very companies shaping America's future are led by Indian minds. Respect doesn't come from words, it comes from undeniable impact. Culturally, India's contribution has been immeasurable. Its traditions, its art, its music, its food, its literature. They've traveled far beyond its borders and enriched the world. That kind of cultural reach builds a quiet respect that cannot be undone by criticism. When a yoga studio opens in New York, when an Indian film festival draws crowds in London, when Indian cuisine becomes a staple in kitchens across the globe, that's respect being earned without a single word. It's proof that a culture can cross oceans and win hearts without having to demand attention. That's how respect works. It flows naturally toward those who add value to the human story. And here's the thing, intimidation might scare people into silence for a moment, but it never earns lasting respect. When someone uses threats, arrogance, or insults to demand recognition, all they really create is resentment. People might play along temporarily, but the moment they can walk away, they will. Respect built on fear collapses as soon as the fear is gone. But respect built on contribution lasts. That's why India didn't need to match Trump's tone. It knew that trying to intimidate your way into relevance is temporary, but proving your worth through action is permanent. It's the difference between a man demanding applause and a man delivering a performance so powerful the audience can't help but clap. One fades quickly, the other lingers forever. When we think about leadership, whether it's a leader of a nation, a company, or even in our personal lives, the lesson is always the same. People don't respect you because you tell them to. They respect you because you show them why they should. If you contribute to their growth, if you create value, if you inspire them, if you bring something to the table that matters, then their respect comes naturally. India, in that moment, showed the world exactly that lesson. It didn't lecture anybody on why it should be respected. It simply reminded everyone of what it already does and what it continues to do. That's the blueprint for real influence. This is why India's response mattered. It shifted the focus away from petty words and toward real evidence of contribution. It reminded everyone that lasting respect cannot be taken, it must be given freely, and the only way to receive it is to prove yourself valuable. And India has proven that in more ways than one. It has shown resilience in the face of adversity, growth in the face of challenge, generosity in the face of crisis, and innovation in the face of competition. That's not a story you can erase with a few dismissive comments. That's a story carved into reality, and reality always outlasts rhetoric. There's a lesson here for individuals as well. Too often, people get caught up in trying to demand respect from those who don't want to give it. They raise their voices. They try to force people to acknowledge them. They get angry when others don't validate their worth. But the truth is, respect doesn't come that way. You don't need to beg for it or demand it. You need to live in a way that makes it undeniable, contribute something real, bring value wherever you go. Let your actions speak louder than your words. The moment you start focusing less on being respected and more on being valuable, the respect will follow naturally. That's exactly what India demonstrated. It turned the whole situation into a reminder that intimidation might get attention, but only contribution gets respect. Confidence is one of those qualities that you cannot fake for long. You can put on a mask, you can talk big, you can act like you've got it all figured out, but eventually the truth shows. Real confidence comes from knowing your value, from being grounded in what you've already proven, From standing tall not because you want people to notice you, but because you know you deserve your place. That's exactly what India displayed when it responded to Trump. It wasn't an insecure reaction. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't about needing validation. It was about standing in its own identity and saying, we don't have to prove anything to you. We already know who we are. That's confidence. And that kind of confidence is unshakable. The difference between confidence and insecurity is easy to see if you look closely. Insecurity always feels the need to shout, to dominate, to remind everyone constantly of how powerful or important it is. Confidence, on the other hand, doesn't have to make noise. It speaks for itself through presence. India's presence is undeniable, and when Trump tried to minimize it, India's response carried a tone of quiet certainty. It didn't rattle, it didn't crumble, and it didn't bend. It simply stood firm and let the facts back it up. That's how you know the response came from confidence. Because when you know who you are, somebody else's opinion doesn't shift your foundation. Look at how India's confidence has been built over time. It's not an overnight story. This is a nation that has gone through centuries of hardship, colonization, poverty, political struggles, and yet each time it has risen stronger. That history builds a resilience that feeds into confidence. A country that has endured that much and still found a way to thrive does not lose its balance just because someone tries to talk down to it. Confidence is born from overcoming, and India's story is full of overcoming. Whether it was fighting for independence, rebuilding itself after economic challenges, or pushing forward in a competitive global market, every chapter has added another layer of certainty to its identity. When Trump came with criticism, India didn't feel the need to explain itself because it had already lived the proof of its strength. Confidence also shows in the way you handle confrontation. Insecurity lashes out. Confidence responds with calmness and precision. In that moment, India didn't feel the need to meet insult with insult. It didn't get dragged into a war of words. Instead, it relied on its achievements, its global partnerships, its undeniable progress to speak for itself. That's a sign of maturity, and maturity is one of the clearest indicators of confidence. It's the ability to stay steady when the other side is trying to provoke you. It's the power of saying, I don't need to play your game because I'm already winning mine. And let's be real, India's confidence is rooted not just in survival, but in contribution. This is a nation that has given the world doctors, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, thinkers, artists, and leaders. Its diaspora communities thrive across the globe, and its influence can be felt in countless industries. That kind of contribution builds self-assurance. When you see your people leading companies, designing innovations, shaping culture, you realize you don't need to shout for recognition. Your work already speaks volumes. India's response to Trump reflected that truth. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't desperate. It was simply confident in what India already is and what it continues to become. Confidence is contagious too. When India stood tall, its people felt that same pride ripple through them. For every Indian watching, it was a reminder that they didn't have to bow to dismissive words from anyone, no matter how powerful they seem. That's the power of national confidence. It filters down to individual confidence. It inspires people to carry themselves differently, to expect respect in their workplaces, in their communities, in their interactions. Because when you see your country refusing to be minimized, it teaches you that you don't have to accept being minimized either. That's why this wasn't just a political moment, it was a cultural and psychological one as well. Think about how this applies to everyday life. In our personal journeys, we all face moments when someone tries to belittle us, dismiss us, or make us feel small. The insecure reaction is to fight back with anger or to fold under pressure. The confident reaction is to stay calm, to let your track record speak, to remember that someone else's opinion doesn't define your value. That's exactly what India modeled on a global stage. It's a lesson that says when you know your worth, you don't have to argue with anybody about it. You just keep being who you are, keep doing what you do, and let the results show themselves. And here's another thing about confidence, it's not arrogance. People sometimes confuse the two. Arrogance is loud. Arrogant people push others down to lift themselves up. Confidence doesn't need to do that. Confidence uplifts, it inspires, it attracts respect naturally. India wasn't trying to dominate Trump, wasn't trying to prove it was superior. It was simply standing firm in its own worth. That distinction is important. Arrogance burns bridges, but confidence builds them because people respect steadiness. They respect those who don't overcompensate. India's confidence in that moment showed the world that it knows its value and doesn't need to crush others to prove it. What makes confidence even more powerful is that it doesn't fade when challenged. In fact, challenge often strengthens it. Trump's words could have rattled a less secure nation, but for India, it became another opportunity to demonstrate what it already knows to be true. And by responding with calm, steady assurance, India sent a message not just to Trump, but to the entire world. This is a nation secure in its place, secure in its contributions, secure in its future. That kind of confidence cannot be shaken because it's not dependent on outside validation. It comes from within, from history, from progress, from undeniable contributions. And when you have that kind of foundation, no amount of criticism can weaken you. Humility is one of those qualities that can be both a strength and a weakness, depending on how the world perceives it. A humble person or a humble nation can sometimes be mistaken for being soft, for being easy to push around, for being too quiet to stand up for themselves. But the truth is, humility is power under control. Humility means you don't need to brag about who you are because you already know your worth. Patience works the same way. People sometimes think that if you're patient, you're weak, you're hesitant, you're afraid to act. But patience is really the discipline to move only when the timing is right. When India responded to Trump, it reminded the world of these truths, that humility is not weakness and patience is not silence. For too long, global conversations often treated India as if it was supposed to sit quietly at the back of the room, listen, nod, and accept whatever was said about it. The West spoke, and India was expected to absorb. But India has been patient. It has been humble, even while building strength. That patience has allowed it to grow at its own pace, to develop resilience, and to learn how to choose the right moments to act. And when the moment came, India showed the world that being quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means that when you finally speak, people will be forced to listen. Humility has always been a part of India's identity. It comes through in its culture, in its traditions, in the way it carries itself on the world stage. But that humility does not mean it lacks confidence or power. It means it doesn't feel the need to shout about its accomplishments every single day. India builds quietly, contributes quietly, and only when necessary, it reveals the full extent of its capabilities. This is why Trump's words didn't shake India, because a humble giant doesn't panic when challenged. A humble giant waits, watches, and then shows its true size when the time is right. That's exactly what happened in this moment. Patience is the other side of that same coin. India has been patient with global politics, patient with criticism, patient even with being underestimated. That patience has given it the wisdom to know when not to react and when to finally push back. Many mistook that patience for silence, for a lack of strength, for weakness. But the truth is, patience is strategy. It means conserving energy for the right fight. It means staying focused on long-term goals instead of being distracted by every insult or provocation. When Trump threw his words, India didn't rush into an emotional outburst. It waited, it measured its response, and it delivered in a way that couldn't be ignored. That's the power of patience. It gives you control when others are losing theirs. There's a lesson in that for every person. How many times in life have we been underestimated because we chose not to fight every battle? People see you let something slide. They assume you're weak. People see you not rushing into conflict. They assume you're scared. But just like India showed, patience doesn't mean fear, and humility doesn't mean weakness. It means you're wise enough to know that not every challenge deserves your energy, and you're secure enough to wait for the right time to reveal your strength. When you live like that, you catch people off guard, because when you finally do push back, the impact is so strong they can't ignore it. India's humility can be seen in the way it shares its knowledge and culture with the world. It doesn't hoard its traditions. It doesn't guard its innovations as if they're secrets. Yoga, meditation, cuisine, philosophy, all of these are gifts India has given openly to the world. That's humility in action, giving without demanding something in return. Yet the spread of those contributions has elevated India's influence globally, making it clear that quiet generosity builds power just as effectively as loud declarations. The same can be said of its patience in global diplomacy. India doesn't rush to the microphone every time there's tension. It often waits, it listens, it balances, and then it acts. That restraint earns respect because it shows control, and control is one of the clearest signs of strength. Now think about the way patience works in personal life. Patience is not just sitting still. Patience is preparation. Patience is growth. Patience is building yourself brick by brick so that when your time comes, you are unshakable. That's what India has been doing on the world stage. While others dismissed it, while others overlooked it, it was building its economy, investing in its people, expanding its technology, strengthening its military, and spreading its culture. So when the time came to respond, it didn't need to scramble. It was already prepared. That's why patience is not silence. It's steady progress waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And humility, when paired with confidence, is one of the most powerful forces in the world. Arrogance might get attention, but it never builds lasting respect. Humility, on the other hand, draws people in because it shows strength without intimidation. That's what India demonstrated. It wasn't trying to prove it was better than Trump or better than anyone else. It was simply showing that it could not be diminished. That quiet but firm confidence is what made the response so powerful. It reminded the world that humility is not a sign of being small. It's a sign of being so secure in your greatness that you don't need to scream about it. India's story is proof that humility and patience, when combined, are not weaknesses but strengths that create a foundation no one can shake. Humility keeps pride in check. Patience keeps emotions in control, and together they create a resilience that cannot be broken by criticism or intimidation. When India finally chose to push back, it wasn't just reacting to Trump's words, it was teaching a lesson to the world. It was saying that being humble doesn't mean being powerless, and being patient doesn't mean being voiceless. It was a moment where the quiet strength that had been underestimated for so long revealed itself, and the impact was felt across the globe.